All right, so yesterday in class, you guys had an opportunity to see a cnidarian, which was a hydra, as well as an arthropod, the Daphnia. And so I think probably lots of you saw different things that we wanted you to see. Wanted you to see maybe a hydra that was budding, which was reproducing asexually by just growing a new organism out of the side of it. And lots of the hydra that you guys looked at were budding. You can see the tentacles. You can see that it's first when you transfer it, because it's been disturbed, it kind of shrivels up a little bit, withdraws. But then as time went on, it starts to stretch out a little bit, sends those tentacles out. You added the Daphnia, a crustacean, a tiny little crustacean. They swim around. In some cases, they were bumping into the hydra, and the hydra would kind of curl up. It wasn't trying to ingest the Daphnia. In others, the hydra had stung the Daphnia. So for some of them, it uses tentacles, has those stinging cells. And then the ones I saw, basically the Daphnia was stuck there, was sort of trying to get away, moving its appendages to swim, but was not able to get away. In some groups, it was sort of, the heart was stopping or it was dying and stopped moving. If we follow that through eventually, it may take a while, because again, you guys notice, the Daphnia is bigger than the hydra. But the hydra can expand quite a bit. So if we had followed through and watched that for a longer period of time, we might see the hydra actually grab the Daphnia, put it into its body opening, and start to digest it. Diksha? Yeah, it could be. They do. Sometimes it just takes longer than we have to see. Colin?
Can the Daphnia use its,
Yeah.
to like trap food particles?
Yeah. Well, it has like a mouth opening that it puts those, and those are mostly for swimming though.
Yeah, because I saw this like weird like crab thing or something. I don't know what it was called. It's like really small one that lives on these corals, and it like has these weird appendages that kind of look like that, except they have like more frill design.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a web thing almost, and they just stick their arms out, let all food in there.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to show you a video here that kind of shows. So some invertebrates have an ability to regenerate. Okay, for example, the hydra you were seeing, it could, if cut in half, reproduce each half that was removed. And some invertebrates, the planaria, a flatworm can do this, a starfish can do this. And so this is a trait that's not found generally in vertebrates. Vertebrates can't regenerate large portions of their body if they're removed, but some invertebrates can.
Wouldn't like one vertebrate that can regenerate part of its body be like an iguana or something? Can't they like drop their tails?
Yeah, they can. And so that some like small parts can regenerate, but not like you can't cut. Yeah, you can't cut it in half and end up with two iguanas. Yeah. So here's a planaria, flatworms, and they can be cut in half and then regenerate both sides. Here you have a lobster that regenerated one of its claws. The smaller claw was cut off, and now it's regenerating a new one. Okay. And here you see the beginning of regeneration in a sea star. If you cut off and if a part has a piece of the central disc, it can regenerate into an entirely new starfish. All right, so we're going to start talking about vertebrates. Okay, so we already went over the invertebrates, and they were in several different phyla, right? Arthropod, mollusca, the worm phyla, echinoderms, cnidarians, porifera. Okay. And then we talked even further about some of the classes of insects. Now we're going to start talking about this group, vertebrates. Vertebrates are animals with a backbone, a protective canal of bone that protects the spinal cord. They are all in one phylum. So when we talk about invertebrates, there are several phylum. All vertebrates are in one phylum called Chordata. And we are going to be talking about different types of classes of the phylum Chordata. Okay, so we're animals with a backbone, kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata. So all of these organisms, unlike the invertebrates, they have a skeleton that's inside. What do we call it for arthropods? A skeleton on the outside. Any idea what this would be called? Close. Endoskeleton. Endo is the opposite of exo, means inside. Like if you ever heard of a person getting an endoscopy, it's when they put a camera down your throat and see your esophagus and your stomach. So endo means inside. So they have a skeleton inside of their body of bone. And the classes we're going to talk about fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and then mammals. We'll talk about each one at a time. We'll go over some characteristics, some adaptations that these classes have, and talk about some different things. Here's a evolutionary tree showing the evolution of the different organisms. So if we think about the history of the earth, invertebrates were the first animals that evolved on earth. And from those invertebrate ancestors, the first chordates that are not vertebrates evolved. And then from there, fish were the first group to evolve. They're the most ancient group of vertebrates. And then amphibians evolved after fish, then reptiles. One branch of reptiles evolved to form the birds, and then different branch of the reptiles eventually evolved into mammals. So we'll start by talking about fish.
Are these other classes are they like humans and like when they're young, like their bones aren't fully fused together?
Yeah.
Are they born with like complete skeletons?
Yes, most are like that. So when we talk about fish, there's actually three classes. Okay? And two are a relatively small and then one really large class of fish. And so one type are called the jawless fish. And you may have never even heard of a jawless fish.
I have.
Okay. Jawless fish include things like lamprey and hagfish. So it means exactly what it says. They have no open and closable jaw. This is, for example, this is the mouth of a lamprey. A lamprey is a typically parasitic fish. What it does is it suctions onto a large fish. It has these round layers of teeth, and even its tongue looks like a drill bit. What it does is it attaches to a fish, drills a hole into the side of it, and lives off of that fish's blood. It's almost like a large vertebrate leech. They look like an eel. They're long. They have a fin along the top. I'm going to tell you some stories in this unit about when I was in college. So when I was in college, I was studying ecology. So I had to take a whole class all about fish, class all about birds, and so forth. And so I'll share some stories about that. So when I was in college, one thing that we did is we went out. I went to the University of Vermont, which is right on Lake Champlain. And so we would go out on like this research boat on Lake Champlain, a really big, really deep lake, and we would do different things there. But on this research boat was kind of like, almost like you see a commercial fishing boat with like equipment to lower nets to different depth, motors to bring them in. You spill the fish onto the deck, and you could sort them, you could identify them, study them, and so forth. So not like a boat you would go water skiing behind, but like a research boat. And one of the things we did is we went out in Lake Champlain, put our nets down, hauled on some fish, and we were looking at, my professor was sort of telling us about identifying some of them, showing us different things about them. And some of the fish that we gathered in that time were lamprey. And so they look like a long eel. They live in Lake Champlain. And we also found big lake trout. And what we found is that some of the lake trout still had a lamprey attached to the side of them. Okay? And some of the lake trout actually had a wound in the side of them. Because after the lamprey detaches, the wound eventually heals, but you could still see the mark where there was once a lamprey attached to these lake trout. So my professor picked up the lamprey and showed us that it's really scary looking. It's got these really sharp rows of teeth. He had on like this rubber apron kind of and waders, and so he put the lamprey on and like suctioned right onto to his rubber waders and was trying to like bore a hole in it. It couldn't do that at that time. But they're pretty strange looking creatures. Some types of lamprey are invasive. They came from Asia actually in boats inadvertently, and they've actually sort of taken over from some native species as they worked their way through the rivers. They made their way through the Northeast, eventually into the Great Lakes. And so there are programs to try to get rid of some of these sea lamprey that are living in the Northeast where they shouldn't be living.
There's some fish that can like breathe, like not underwater for an extensive.
Yeah, like a lungfish or a mud skipper.
Lungfish, that's what I was thinking.
They can stay out of the water for a pretty long time. All right, I'll show you this video about the lamprey real quick.
I already watched this video. Of course, there was like the goby taking over like the rock bass.
Yeah.
Because rock bass aren't like big like normal bass.
Yeah.
And on the St. Lawrence River, like especially near docks, you can just look down and there's like hundreds of them instead where they used to be rock bass.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the second class of fish are the cartilaginous fish. These are fish that actually don't have a skeleton of bone. They have a skeleton of cartilage, the stuff like your ears and your nose are made out of. That's cartilage. And so their skeleton is made out of it. It's a hard, tough tissue, but it's not bone. This includes sharks, are cartilaginous fish, skates and rays. Those are examples of these fish. They're quite ancient evolutionarily as well.
Eagle rays are so cool.
And finally, the last group, the largest group, are the bony fish. These are probably the fish you're most familiar with. If you go fishing, this is what you're catching. Trout, bass, salmon, all sorts of different catfish, and basically almost any other fish you think of is a bony fish. They're the most recent evolutionarily. Oh, so this is a picture I scanned because I'll tell you about this fish because this shark attacked me. So when I was a kid, we would go to Florida every year with my parents, and this was probably when I was I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. And so, I wasn't like a big fisherman or anything. Neither really was my father. But for some reason that year when we were in Florida, my dad decided he was going to take me deep sea fishing. So in deep sea fishing, you go on a boat, they take you on the ocean, you fish and catch fish. That's the idea. So we went to Fort Lauderdale where the boat you see in the background, we went on that boat. And we were just doing our fishing thing and, whatever. It was fun, I guess. I don't know. And then on this boat, there's probably 20 other, passengers fishing. Okay, and there's a crew that's helping everybody.
Like a charter?
Yeah, it's a charter.
It's a charter.
Yeah. But not just for us, for, a bunch of random people that we didn't know as well.
Yeah.
So they have, on this boat, as part of the package they did, they have, this little raffle. Where they put everyone's name in a bucket, and they pull out a name, and whoever wins the raffle gets to fish with live bait. Because we were all fishing with chunks of fish. But we got to fish, whoever they picked got to fish with a live fish. So obviously, if you're fishing with live bait, you're more likely to catch a bigger fish or something a little more interesting. So they happened to pick my name out of the raffle. Yep, so they got my name, all right, great. So they give me this live fish. They don't give it to me, they do it all for you, basically. They put it all on the line, they put it out there, and I'm just holding onto the pole, all right, great. So we're going through, and I catch something on this pole. And so, I'm doing my reeling it in thing, and it's ooh, geez, it's kind of hard here. And so, then all of a sudden my pole's just oh my God. So, I'm just going crazy. So finally, the crew guys come over and they're helping a little bit, oh wow, this is something big, you're doing really great. So basically they take my pole and they're reeling the thing in, and I'm
you're doing
watching, look at this fish you caught, and then they're doing everything. So anyway, they finally get it to the edge of the boat, and so I'm kind of leaning over looking at what it is, and it's huge, just huge fish. And then I see the fin, the caudal fin come above the water, and they're oh man, that's a shark. So I'm oh wow, a shark. So you know, it's probably, I would say, 6 feet long. And so you don't just like reel it up and it's dangling there.
You don't hold it over the side of the boat and get a pair of
So what they
pliers.
do is they have it, they get it close to the side of the boat, and then I'm like, all right, well now what? And so then they go and they have, in this like little room here, they go in their little tool shed there and they come out, and what they have is like a big broom handle, but on the end is a giant hook.
It's called a gaff.
Well, it looks like a giant hook. And so these two guys, they each get one of these giant hooky things,
Gaff.
and they just lean over the side of the boat and they go, and they jab this hook, two of them, into the side of the shark, and then they like go 1, 2, 3, and they haul this huge 6-foot shark onto the deck of the boat. So, but now it's really mad. And I'm about this tall, and now I'm like, it's all bleeding, like blood out of this hole that they just put it in. And so now it's starting to chase me. So it's like flopping around. It's chasing me down the deck of the boat. I'm running away, crying, because the shark's like about to eat one of my feet. So I'm like, all right, so I'm running away. So they go back into their little tool shed, and the last tool they bring out are baseball bats. And so I'm crying, this is not that funny. So as it's going around, these two guys that hook their boat, they come out with their baseball bats, and they just take their like, smash it in the head, and then the other one, smash it in the head. And so now more blood is pouring out all over. The deck is like covered with blood, it looked like The Shining, and I'm crying, and so finally they beat it to death. Yeah, and then they put it.
What they do with the salmon we caught.
They put it in this little tubby thing, and so now there's a dead bloody shark. It's like this, and the whole time I'm on the boat on the ride back, like looking at it, like worried it's gonna like
To make sure
flop
it's not
out
jump
there
out.
and get me in the back of the neck and kill me. So yeah, that's the shark. So at the end, they took it off, and they're like, okay, well, you want to take the shark? And so I'm with my dad, like, what are we gonna do with this giant hammerhead shark? I'm like, no. And so we just gave it to the crew guys, and they were gonna do, I don't know, whatever they were gonna do with it. But that's about when I was attacked by the shark. That was scary.
We used to there's a big enough fish now, so I just take a bite.
What? Alright. So let's talk about some of the adaptations that fish have. So you obviously know fish have a body covered in scales. Different classes of vertebrates sort of have different body coverings. And fish generally have a layer of scales on the outside. They kind of overlap one another. They provide like a protective layer, but they also secrete a mucus. Like if you've ever gone fishing and pick up a fish and it's like slimy and slippery. And that's because they have this layer of mucus. They secrete, it helps protect them from parasites, helps them move and glide through the water pretty easily. One of the things we're going to talk about with each group is their body temperature. And there's sort of two, well, there's actually more, but we're going to simplify it. So there's sort of, you talk about animals as either cold-blooded or warm-blooded, even though there's things in between. And what does it mean? Fish are cold-blooded, but what does that term actually mean? It doesn't mean that their blood is cold. It has a different meaning. Ella? Yeah, is that they don't have internal control of their body temperature, like we do, for example. Instead, their body temperature will rise and fall depending on their surroundings. So if a fish is out now in First Lake, and First Lake is 37 degrees Fahrenheit, the fish living in that lake, that's about what their body temperature is. As that lake warms up over the spring and summer to 55, 60 degrees, their body temperature also rises. So they don't keep control of their body temperature. It depends on the surroundings. So this is, in some ways, this is a disadvantage. So when an organism's body temperature drops, it's not very active. Its body processes all slow down. So in the winter, when it's really cold, those animals that are cold-blooded cannot be very active. Okay? So they're very sedentary. So what's the benefit, however? Do you know what a benefit would be then? Ella? Yeah. It doesn't take very much energy to stay alive because you're not using lots of energy to maintain a high body temperature. organisms that are cold-blooded can often survive on very little food. If you ever had like a pet reptile, you might know you don't have to feed it very much, right? Like if someone has a big pet snake, like a boa or something, you might feed it once a week.
I have a pet
Okay,
tortoise.
because they can survive. They're not expending lots of energy on maintaining their body temperature. So they're cold, but they also can't live in a wide variety of habitats. So they can't live in the extreme cold conditions. You don't find cold-blooded
The
organisms,
Arctic.
in the Arctic or things like that. So that's the sort of trade-off there. Question, Tom?
Would cold-blooded animals, just not fish, but just cold-blooded animals in general, are they able to feel like the difference in temperature?
It's hard to say how animals,
How
even
they
animals
feel,
in
yeah.
general, like sometimes I see the deer out and it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Wow, do they like feel that they're
Cold,
cold,
yeah.
or are they just kind of?
Bro,
I don't know.
I want to straight up be a deer. Dude.
All right. So fertilization. We'll talk about this with each group. So all the animals reproduce sexually, and there's different ways that can happen. So fish are an example of a type of animal that has what we call external fertilization. What this means is that when fish reproduce, basically the female releases eggs just into the water. And at the same time, the male releases sperm cells just into the water. Some of those sperm cells mix with the eggs and fertilize them. So that's outside of the body. As we move along, we'll talk about some organisms that have internal fertilization. But fish have external fertilization. When fish reproduce like this, what's it called? There's a term, I know some of you,
Special
you've heard of it. Because sometimes it's called spawning.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
So when fish spawn, when fish are reproducing, fish can lay and release huge amounts of eggs. Some fish can release hundreds of thousands of eggs in one spawn. And part of the reason why is because they develop outside of the body. Many of them don't get fertilized, many of them get eaten, many of them don't have the right conditions, so only a small percent actually make it into hatching and into adulthood. So that's why they have to produce so many. The other thing we'll talk about is after fertilization, where does the young develop? So in fish, they develop externally. They develop outside of the body in the water. After it's fertilized, that little egg will develop inside of it. Tiny little fish will eventually hatch. So they have external fertilization and external development. Now, it's not just random, like fish, when they're spawning, like a male fish doesn't just release sperm cells like at any random time. Typically, animals that have external fertilization have some means of coordinating so that the male and the female are in the same vicinity at the same time. Usually they have some sort of behavior that they undergo, and then they release the reproductive products together at the same time. But the fertilization happens outside of the body. Many fish have a means of camouflage called counter shading. You see this often in birds and fish. When the top part of the organism is dark in color, but the bottom portion is lighter in color. How would this be a helpful adaptation? Anyone have an idea about why counter shading is useful for these animals specifically? Tyler?
When animals look up from the bottom, it seems a lot brighter than the sun.
Yeah. So because they might have predators below them in the water or above them, they need to be camouflaged from both sides, but looking up at a fish with a light underside, it will blend in better with the sky and the sun. Looking from above down at one of these fish, the darker background against the bottom of the lake or whatever, helps it to blend in better. Same thing for birds. Birds might have predators above or below. So it helps them to sort of be hidden. Or you might see another example. This obviously is not a fish. What is it? Which is a bird. But they have counter shading as well. So it provides camouflage from both above and below. fish have an interesting sense organ. It's called the lateral line. Can you see it in this fish?
Yeah.
It's it's kind of faint, but this line down the middle of the fish on its lateral portion, that's called the lateral line, and it's a sense organ. It's one way that fish can detect movement and motion in the water. So if you ever try to like catch a fish with your hands or with a net, it's really hard. And part of the reason is because they can sense the movement in the water. As soon as you disturb the water, their lateral line can sense that, and then they can pretty easily evade you. Fish obtain oxygen through their gills. Gills are special respiratory organs that are adapted to get oxygen out of the water. Gills do not work in the air. Gills have very, very fine structure. It's very delicate. And when they're in the water, they work great. As water passes over the gills, those gills are rich in blood. They can absorb oxygen from the water. But when the fish is out of the water, the gills no longer have the support from the water, and so they all just sort of collapse. And then they're not able to get oxygen out of the air. They have a covering called the operculum. Like if you see a fish and you see the sides of its head moving in and out, that's the cover. Beneath that cover that's moving are their gills. Fish will take water into their mouth, force it over their gills, then it comes out through that opening. So that's why, like, if you go fishing, you could like hook a fish onto one of those little chain things by putting that little hook into their mouth and out through their gill opening. You're not hurting them in any way. It just goes through that opening. That's the same opening that oxygen would open. Fish. Maybe I should stop here because I have a story about some.
Yeah.
And I have a story about electrofishing, but I'll save those two for tomorrow.